Hi there, this is Jimmy, and I wanted to say, even though I believe in the existence of God, I believe that the so-called proofs of the existence of God and the arguments that we put forward for the existence of God, they really suck, and they're not very good. And I just wanted to take a moment and talk about why they're not any good and why we need to be more honest as Christians about our apologetics. The first reason that we often put forward for the existence of God is the first cause argument. We look at the world around us and we say, well, gee shucks, all of this had to come from somewhere because something can't come from nothing. Buildings don't just get built. They have to be designed, and an architect puts them there. So therefore, I exist, so therefore I must have been created. And that's the basis of our argument, that there's this first cause, this first thing that we ultimately identify as God that caused us to come into existence. The only problem with this is that it does not explain God's existence. And while we can sit there and say, well, God has always existed, therefore, he didn't need to be created, we can also say, and in fact, the first law of thermodynamics in physics actually states the universe has also always existed too. So that argument really falls apart if you were to try to take it to its logical end. And you're left with either the choice of believing that there is a God who has always existed that created the universe, or you're left with a belief in the law of physics that states matter and mass has always existed, always will exist, and nothing came before it. Which one is true? Which one can you prove? Which one is the one that you're actually able to go back and say, aha, I know which one it is? Well, at the end of the day, you really can't. Both make an assumption. Both arguments would make an assumption that was the beginning, that either God was the beginning or the universe has just always existed in the same way that God has always existed. So we can't really use that argument, even though, don't get me wrong, there's a certain degree of kind of common sense reasonableness to the idea that we exist because we were created, and we were created by a creator. And while that's perfectly reasonable, that's not 100% proof that God exists. The second argument we often use to prove that God exists is that we look at the universe and all its complexities and all its amazingness, and we sit there and think, wow, look at all the order of this. This bookshelf behind me exists because somebody stacked a bunch of boards on top of each other, nailed it together, and something like this just would not spontaneously exist in nature. The pages of these books would not just spontaneously form through combustion. Look how complex and beautiful and wonderful this world is. Look how the universe is. If the world were only a couple degrees closer to the sun or a couple degrees further away, life as we know it would not exist. We would not exist. Therefore, the universe is so amazingly complex that the odds of us spontaneously existing and coming into being through random chance and happenstance, the odds are so absurd that we can't help but believe that there must be a God, because we couldn't have gotten here any other way because it's so complicated that we even exist to begin with. And while, that's, again, a reasonable argument, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the odds are that we exist. It doesn't matter how complex the universe is. It doesn't matter what sort of order there is. The mathematical probability of our existence actually doesn't matter, because the fact of the matter is you and I exist, and we live in a world that is complex. Showing that the world is complex is only proof that the world is complex. It's just a simple observation. In and of itself does not prove how the world got as complex as it did. It only proves that, hey, we live in a complicated place and we don't understand how everything works, or to the degree that we do understand how everything works, well, that is very difficult to reconcile without proof of the existence of, or without the existence of a God. But that in itself is not proof that God exists. It just proves that the world is a very amazingly complex place. But the fact that we're here is proof that either God exists or that random things happen to get us here. And even though the probability of random things getting us here is very low, the fact that we exist shows the probability worked, and that we beat all odds, and the probabilities actually won. And that's all that matters. It's a 1-to-1 chance that we got here because we do exist. So we can't argue the complexity of the universe is proof of God's existence. And even though there's reasonableness to that idea, it ultimately doesn't hold up when you shake it down. Next is the idea of perfection. Some people argue, well, look how beautiful the world is. Its beauty surely shows that there's proof of God. How else could it be so beautiful? Or we have the idea of moral perfection. Where would we get this idea of something good and perfect if something good and perfect did not in fact exist? And you see a lot of people argue, especially like C.S. Lewis and St. Augustine and some others, you'll see them argue things like that. But the fact is, well, that in itself is not proof of anything. It just shows that we believe there's something perfect and that we believe something is beautiful. And it's actually just amounts to circular reasoning at the end of the day. It's just proof that, hey, that is amazing, and I have an idea about it. So just having an idea of something is not, in fact, proof of its existence. After this, people will often move to miracles and say, well, we read about a bunch of miracles throughout history, and there are some people out there who purport to have experienced miracles today. But past and present miracles aren't in them of themselves proof of the existence of God. All that it shows at the end of the day is that we live in a world that we don't fully understand and strange things happen. And miracles of themselves, even in the Bible, aren't even used to prove the existence of God. In fact, when Moses got in a dispute with Pharaoh and the Egyptians, when he was, calling God to, or calling on Moses, or calling on Pharaoh to let my people go, him and Pharaoh got into a miracle performing contest, and the magicians of Egypt performed some miracles, and Moses performed some miracles. Now, eventually Moses performed more miracles than the Egyptians were able to produce, and that really, was something that weighed heavily on their thinking process. But miracles in themselves aren't proof of the existence of God. It just shows, wow, we can do some pretty amazing stuff. And this really weird world that we live in. And we don't understand all these things that happen. They're just, wow, they're miraculous. So a miracle in itself is not proof of the existence of God. It just only proves that, strange things happen. And we don't understand them. It as compelling as something as a miracle can be, the scriptures even warn us about resting our faith on miracles because, the Egyptians, they performed their miracles, and it talks about false prophets who can perform lying signs and wonders, who can perform miracles and even call fire down out of heaven. So again, miracles aren't proof of the existence of God. It just proves that, hey, that's something that's awesome that just happened. So you have to think about what just happened and reconcile it in your own mind when a miracle happens. But in itself is not proof. And then finally, people appeal to experiences. Well, experiences are very subjective, and just because I experience God doesn't necessarily mean you've had a very strong experience with God. Honestly, try as I might and pray that I might cause you to experience a miracle or experience God in some sort of manner. It's kind of hard to objectively set up and say, hey, this thing you're going through right now, that's God. That feeling you're getting, that's God. Well, that feeling you're getting could be a delusional thought. It could be the result of something you ate. It could be some sort of strange psychosis. It could be some sort of mental trauma that you're experiencing. It could be the result of some sort of mass hypnosis. So there's a million reasons to doubt any experience you have is God. In fact, the experience you could be having could be the devil. The devil could be playing a trick on you and causing you to think he's God, because, that's something the devil would want to do, right? So if the devil can convince you he's God, how would you know he's not? And for that matter, how would you even, if you're going to base your proof of God off your experience of God, well, how would you know that was really God at the end of the day? The truth is, you couldn't. It would be ultimately an assumption that you're assuming that whatever religious, emotional experience that you had, whatever presence you felt stirring in your heart or in your mind or in the room, in the atmosphere, that you're ultimately making a leap of faith, an assumption that what you experienced is God. Because not too many people out there go around and say, I experienced the devil. We're much more willing to say, I experienced God. And so as emotionally powerful as such experiences may be in the life of an individual, convincing them that what they experience is indeed God, at the end of the day, there's real no way of knowing what you experienced was in fact God, from an objective point of view. So finally I come to this, and in all my wrestling over the years of my faith and struggling to believe in God and prove God and argue about God, and talk to others about God, I've come to this simple realization that the only way we can prove the existence of God to somebody is for them to accept the existence of God as a self-evident sort of truth. And even the Apostle Paul kind of reasoned as such in Romans chapter 1, where he said, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him or give him thanks, but became foolish in their speculations. And that's from Romans chapter 1, 19 through 21. In which Paul argues that basically, there's this sort of self-evident truth that people possess that cause them to believe in God. Now, some people will do some deceptive things about that. They'll engage in futile speculations. They'll go through all sorts of mental gymnastics that ultimately talk them out of that sort of prior, assumption that they had in their hearts and their minds. And once people start going down that road, there's not too much you can do logically to bring them back to the assumption, to the belief that God exists. All you can do is simply do what you see Moses do when he argued with Pharaoh, or in other places in the Bible where the knowledge of God, the proof of God that the prophets, that the apostles, that Jesus offered was simply through proclamation. They didn't argue about the existence of God. They just proclaimed that God existed. And as a result of you hearing that message, they hoped to stir something in your heart that would cause you to ultimately believe what they had to say. But at the end of the day, they really couldn't sit there and point, and they didn't even attempt to point to all sorts of empirical, rational arguments about the existence of God. They simply proclaimed that God exists. And I believe that as Christians, when we go about trying to minister to people who may be doubtful about the existence of God, instead of getting caught up in all sorts of esoteric arguments about the existence of God, we just need to simply proclaim that he exists and allow the Holy Spirit to work in the heart of those individuals so that they can see the truth of God's existence and ultimately come to believe in Jesus Christ, his Son, so that they can be saved. This is Jimmy. Just thought I'd toss that out there. Let me know what you think right below. Like this video, share it, do whatever you want. Hate it if you want, but give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a good day.